So today we're digging into something called Project 2025. It's this massive, nearly 900-page document from the Heritage Foundation, and it is essentially a detailed blueprint for how a potential conservative administration could reshape the entire federal government right from day one. I mean, this plan is designed to leave no stone unturned. Let's break down exactly what that means. To really get the why behind this whole project, you've got to understand the mindset of the people who wrote it. This quote, right from the foreword, pretty much sets the stage. The argument here is that the federal government has just gotten way too big and that it's actually been turned against core conservative principles. And in their view, that makes a total overhaul not just an option, but a necessity. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the blueprint itself, what it is and where it came from. Then we're diving into its three main pillars: changing the people in government, using executive power to its fullest, and then putting new policies into action. And finally, we'll look at the ultimate vision all this is supposed to build toward: a completely reshaped government. Okay, so first things first, what is Project 2025, really? Well, it's a lot more than just a long document. It's a playbook, and it's a playbook that comes with a history of success, which gives its authors a whole lot of confidence. The best way to think about Project 2025 is like an operations manual for a new president. Seriously. This isn't just a wish list of ideas, it's a comprehensive playbook, laying out specific policy recommendations, personnel suggestions, even transition plans. The whole point is to let a new administration hit the ground running with a very clear, unified agenda. And, this isn't the first time a plan like this has been put together. A lot of the confidence behind this project comes from its direct predecessor, the Mandate for Leadership, back in 1981. That document had a huge influence on the Reagan administration. Get this, over 60% of its recommendations actually became policy. So Project 2025 is really meant to be its modern-day successor. All right, so that brings us to the first pillar, personnel. The thinking here is pretty straightforward. If you want to change the government's direction, you have to start by changing the people who are actually running it. And that begins with a big promise: to dismantle the administrative state. Now, that's a term they use to describe the whole body of career civil servants and the agencies that carry out federal policy. This quote right here gets to the absolute core of the philosophy. Personnel is policy. The whole argument is that to really control what the government does, a president needs to have direct control over the people who do it all the way from the top down. So the plan basically sets up this big contrast. On one side, you have the career civil servants, who are described as this sprawling federal bureaucracy that kind of does its own thing. And on the other side, you have the proposed solution: a new class of political appointees who are, quote, deeply committed to the president's agenda and see their only job as making that agenda happen. And we are not talking about a small change here. The scale is massive. The plan calls for identifying and installing thousands of these new non-career political appointees across the entire government. And the engine for all this would be the Office of Presidential Personnel, or PPO, which would be in charge of creating a pipeline of pre-vetted people ready to go from day one. So how exactly would they assert this control over the people already working there? Well, the plan lays out a few key tools: bringing back some Trump-era executive orders to speed up discipline, making it easier to fire employees who are seen as unfireable, and, this is crucial, tying the administration's policy goals directly into employee performance reviews. The idea is to make sure the entire federal workforce is directly supervised by and aligned with the political executives. Okay, so you've got the new people in place. What's next? Well, that brings us to the second pillar: wielding executive power. The argument is that just having the right people isn't enough. The president then has to use the full constitutional authority of their office to direct them. And the legal argument for all this? Well, the project points straight to Article 2 of the Constitution. The interpretation here is that the entire executive branch, every department, every agency, exists for one reason: to carry out the president's agenda. From this perspective, federal agencies don't get to have their own agendas. They're there to implement the platform that the American people voted for. The strategy for taking control of an agency follows a pretty clear three-step process. Step 1, install loyal political appointees in all the leadership positions. Step 2, control the money, using the really powerful Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. And finally, Step 3, use executive orders to direct policy and regulations right from the White House. And this is a really key point. The president's budget isn't just about numbers anymore. It's seen as a powerful tool for control.
The plan argues that by controlling exactly where the money goes, the White House can basically force any federal agency to follow its policy priorities, no matter how independent that agency might seem.
All right, so we've got the people and the power. Now, let's talk about the policy. What does all this top-down control actually look like in practice? Let's take a look at a few examples of specific changes for some key federal departments.
Let's start with the Department of Homeland Security. The plan says that U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, should be totally refocused. Using executive authority, its mission would be shifted away from processing benefits and turned primarily into a screening and vetting agency, all to, in the words of the document, protect the homeland.
Over at the Environmental Protection Agency, the plan would use that same executive power to rewrite the Waters of the United States rule, also known as WOTUS. This would seriously narrow the EPA's power to regulate, limiting it to only relatively permanent bodies of water. The stated goal here is to protect private property rights. And in foreign policy, the Department of State would be directed to make countering China its top priority. The strategy laid out is what they call an unambiguous offensive-defensive mix, and it's designed to make what the plan calls Beijing's aggression unaffordable.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. After you change the people, assert executive power, and roll out all these new policies, what's the big picture? What's the end game that Project 2025 is really aiming for?
Well, the end goal is a federal government that is just fundamentally different. It would be a lot smaller, with power heavily consolidated in the White House. Federal agencies wouldn't really be independent bodies anymore. They'd be direct tools for carrying out the president's agenda. This would effectively mean the end of what the project's authors call the administrative state.
When you boil it all down, this entire massive project is really built on one central idea. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. What are the implications, both the ones they intend and the ones they don't, of having a federal government where the president's personal agenda is the main driver behind everything every agency does? That's the core idea to really chew on.